The manufacturer changes, a few years ago were certainly the first big major change that has happened, in recent memory. And that sent a lot of us scrambling to try to figure out, what was that going to look like? Do we report data? Do you not report data to the manufacturers?
So, Robert, in your opinion, what are 2 to 3 examples of responsible, defensible ways teams use 340B savings to expand access and services?
How do you think that the 340B leaders, can prepare for transparency without adding new bureaucracy layers, without adding new operational layer, and keeping it straightforward for themselves and for their TPs as well?
Sometimes life or death to these programs. So, again, making sure your recertification is up to date, making sure you maintain your eligibility.
Welcome to 340B Pulse, a NorthArc podcast powered by Purologics. I am Mohammad Atif, your host. I am CTO and founder at Purologics and co-founder at NorthArc. For nearly 2 decades, we have been building healthcare systems, infrastructure, data platforms, and compliance-heavy environments where precision really matters. Over time, that work naturally led us deeper into operational realities of 340B, especially around claims validation, reporting gaps, manufacturer requirements like ESD and Beacon, and ultimately program defensibility. And that's really why this podcast exists. 340B Pulse is about thoughtful, operator-level conversations, not noise, not politics, but real execution discussion, like how program actually function day to day. I'm joined today by my co-host, Salman Asif, who leads product and infrastructure initiatives across 340B workflows.
Thanks a lot, Atif. Excited to be here. Looking forward to unpacking where real friction shows up inside 340B workflows, especially at the operational layer. We'll try to stay close to the grounds, controls, evidence, and what holds up under scrutiny. And we'll also try to focus on execution, not theory. And if you run any operations, you recognize these patterns. And if you ever had to answer or provide a 340B decision trail on a 4 p.m. on a Friday, then this one is definitely for you.
Thank you, Salman. Really looking forward. And today's conversation is going to touch different important areas in 340B space, like transparency and reporting pressure, compliance and audit readiness, creative but defensible use of 340B savings, optimization and program expansion, and rebate pilot concept, like what it means operationally regardless of timelines. So to help us explore this, we are joined by Robert Ferraro. Robert is a pharmacist with over a decade of experience in 340B space. He's currently the CEO of Ravin Consultants, one of the known company where he helped grow the firm to support nearly 80 clients nationwide. His experience spans contract pharmacy expansion, specialty pharmacy programs, compliance strategy, and navigating evolving manufacturer restrictions. Robert truly operates at the ground level of 340B. Robert, welcome to 340B Pulse. We are glad to have you here.
Hey, good morning. Thank you both for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, Robert. So, Robert, before we dive into specific topics, can you share a bit about your journey into 340B and what gives you focus in this space today?
Sure. As far as my journey goes, I graduated pharmacy school at the University of Rhode Island in 2009. And from there, my pharmacy career, I think like many others, launched in retail pharmacy. After doing that for about 7 years, I found my way into 340B. I began working at a contract pharmacy whose business model was to implement contract pharmacies on site at covered entities. And I didn't know anything about 340B at that time, but I learned very quickly. And we continued to expand, this model of putting contract pharmacies on site at covered entities. From there, I took a position in Ohio with a dish entity and helped them build a specialty pharmacy program from the ground up. That was a very fulfilling process. I learned more about the business end of 340B in that position. I was more on the back end of things, looking over our P&L and leading our team of pharmacists and pharmacy liaisons. Once I discovered that I kind of had a very high interest in the business dealings of 340B, I went back and got my MBA through the University of Tennessee. And shortly after that, I found my way to Ravin Consultants. And I've been here now going on almost 8 years. And, when I started with Ravin, I think I was our third employee, and we had about 2 or 3 clients at the time. And now we're a team of up to 16 people now. And as you mentioned, we have about 80 clients across the country that we help.
That seems like a great journey and a lot of learnings throughout this journey period. So, Robert, tell me, was it a specific moment where you realized how operationally complex 340B really is?
Yes, yes, there was. Especially when working with larger clients who have multiple TPAs. They might have 3 or sometimes 4 TPAs that they're using to help manage their programs, and trying to accumulate and analyze all that data becomes very complex. You're looking at multiple spreadsheets, different, that they're all trying to tell you the same thing. If you need a captured claims report, you might have to run one out of a well partner, one from Walgreens, one from your third party TPA, and they're all giving you the same information, but the headings are different and the formatting is different. So
So a lot of like clerical work with different data formats, different like channel of communications, a lot of like clerical work, right?
Yeah, so we built a program that in Power BI that pulls it all together and puts it all in one place. So we use that every day in our work now. But yeah, that was kind of my first vision of like, oh my God, there's this data everywhere, and then we need to get this all in one place and make it manageable.
So it seems like it's not just a consultancy on the Ravin side, but you guys are also offering tech solutions where if a cover entity working with multiple TPAs, you guys are like capturing data from different sources and making it to one flow, making the life easier for cover entities.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. So Robert, from your experience, like what has changed most in last 5 to 7 years? What have you seen in 340B space?
There are a lot more eyeballs on 340B now than there ever have been. We've got some bipartisan discussions going on, both pro and con. The manufacturer changes, a few years ago were certainly the first big major change that has happened, in recent memory. And that sent a lot of us scrambling to try to figure out, what was that going to look like? Do we report data? Do you not report data to the manufacturers? And through 340B ESP, that was a pretty big one. But that's mostly settled down now. I think most covered entities, have their reporting structure in place, and they know, what their plan is for that. The rebate model certainly threw everybody for a loop, but now that's on hold. So we'll see what happens there.
Got it. So you talk about rebate pilot. So when you think about the rebate pilot conceptually, what operational capabilities does it force teams to improve, even if the timeline shifts? We know that it is on hold right now.
Right. Yeah, it's on hold, but probably not forever. So we still have to think about it. And historically, the focus of 340B compliance and kind of business has been around inventory and replenishment management, making sure that you've got your accumulation tracking in place, and you get your 340B savings. Now, if the rebate pilot goes through, it will shift the focus more towards just cleaner NDC level claims capture and tighter payer mapping. It's going to be a real challenge to figure out that's going to be a whole new audit process, making sure that you are receiving the rebates that you're supposed to be receiving from each manufacturer. And it looks like, unfortunately, each manufacturer might be doing it a little bit differently. There's not going to be one set process where that happens. So your teams will have to know about each different process, and you'll have to have really tight policies and procedures in place to make sure that you are not leaving money on the table in the form of unclaimed rebates.
Got it. Well, thank you for putting the details into that. So, in your opinion, what's the minimum control set that you had want in place before any rebate style model becomes a reality?
I think the main focus will be on validating like the claims to purchases, being able to track individual prescriptions down to where that was ordered. It's going to be the key to making sure your rebates are being received. Having the dispute escalation, in your mind as well will be important, because inevitably disputes are going to come up with the rebate model. You're going to have to fight and claw back on the manufacturers in some cases. So having that process outlined for your team will be important as well. Trying to think, there'll be specific, roles between the covered entity, the contract pharmacies. Within the covered entity, you're going to have to probably engage people that are not used to dealing with 340B. People's financial controller or chief financial officer, they know about 340B right now, but they're not probably deep in the weeds of it. So if I were a covered entity, I'd probably be training those financial folks a little bit more on 340B. So when the time comes, they know enough to be dangerous and be involved in this process.
And definitely, like minimum controls is the difference between what a covered entity thinks that they are compliant, and instead of that, if they need to prove it, then whether they can do it quickly or not is something a different story. And in the rebate world, that becomes a new challenge of its own. And as you mentioned, with the traceability across the initial purchase made by the covered entity themselves to dispense, that traceability is going to be a lot more important in the rebate world, since that is going to be the gap, or that is going to be the storyline where the rebates are going to be generated from, and a lot of evidence still needs to be proved in order to get those rebates. The next question that we had was about transparency, like at the operator level. What does transparency really look like, and what evidence do the teams have to provide most often, in your opinion?
Yeah, thanks. Transparency, that's an increasing topic as well now. I think there are 10 states as of right now, if I'm not mistaken, that have passed transparency legislation, which requires 340B transparency. And kind of what that looks like is, it's a variety of things. It depends on the state and the legislation. But typically the requirements are reporting on total 340B purchase volume, estimated savings that's coming back from the 340B program, what the payer mix looks like. Some states want to know specifics around contract pharmacy fee structures. Medicaid, carve-in is always going to be a topic because that's important for the states, because the states are subsidizing the Medicaid in most cases. But transparency, people think about this in different ways. To me, transparency requirements are a good thing for 340B. They're the best way that 340B covered entities can show what they're doing. Because, aside from those things I just mentioned, you can also report things about how you're using savings, and, how you're expanding patient access through 340B. So, I encourage covered entities not to be afraid of transparency. This is something that will really hopefully open the eyes of everybody looking at 340B and will be able to show the amazing work that's being done.
Right. That's absolutely correct. And as you mentioned, that this transparency pressure, this should be taken out positively by every stakeholder involved in this program, because it creates the same outcomes. It removes the black boxes and increases the visibility into the evidence trails. That saves everybody's time and makes the process just more efficient, and provides us the ability to focus on future progress towards more creative resource utilization, more creative use of saving utilization, for which we will also love to know your opinion. But before that, we just had one more question about transparency, which was about how do you think that leaders, the 340B leaders, can prepare for transparency without adding new bureaucracy layers, without adding new operational layers, and keeping it straightforward for themselves and for their TPAs as well?
Sure. Yeah. And most of the data that's being required in this transparency legislation, it's data that's already readily available to covered entities. So it doesn't have to get super complex with creating new kinds of reports. Again, use the data that you already have. Just build a simple savings, methodology as far as like how you use savings, and just stick to it. And again, you're kind of having to bring these finance people, on the fringe of 340B. They're coming more to the forefront, just like in the last topic. So controllers and CFOs, prepare yourselves to be more involved in 340B, because a lot of this transparency reporting is going to require, your financial input.
Got it. Yeah, so we talk a lot about savings, but less about how they are responsibly utilized. So, Robert, in your opinion, what are 2 to 3 examples of responsible, defensible ways teams use 340B savings to expand access and services?
Yes, this is one of my favorite topics. And I could talk for a long time on this, but I'll try to keep it just to a few bullet points. Things that we see, that are amazing things that we see our clients doing. Things like food banks or transportation access programs. That's a direct benefit to the communities that these covered entities serve. And we've seen the food banks. We've actually walked into some of our client sites and seen them, and they're huge. And patients can come in and pick up fresh produce, fresh eggs, lots of different canned good items, and it's an amazing thing to see. Same with transportation access. That usually comes in the forms of bus vouchers or Uber or Lyft credits and things like that. And then as far as expanding, patient care, a couple of uses would be to add on mobile clinics that can get out deeper into the community and do testing at the park or different things like that. And adding on different service lines. Mental health is one that we see get added on a lot with 340B savings, which is hugely impactful to the community. Same thing with so mental health service lines is another one that we see get added on pretty frequently, and that's hugely impactful to the communities that are being served here.
Awesome. So, Robert, it seems like it's really adding value through especially these mental health programs and food banks and getting access through to travel. So these are all sounds great, like initiatives. So how do you document saving utilization so it's credible and not just a narrative?
So when you're documenting the savings or the utilization of savings, I think some people think that they have to have a separate, bank account, but you really don't need to go that detailed. We talked about the savings calculation methodology, and that holds true here. And that just basically means making sure that everyone is comparing apples to apples when you're talking about savings. That's going to be your gross 340B revenue. Take out the contract pharmacy or in-house pharmacy costs. Take out the cost of drugs. Take out the cost of your TPA and all those costs of doing business, and that leaves you with your 340B savings. And that calculation is not the same for every entity. It doesn't have to be the same. You just have to make sure that at your entity, you're doing it the same way each time. Getting the board and executives on board, reviewing these things quarterly is important, to making sure that everyone's thinking about it the same way. And again, just there should be line items for the use of savings that get categorized similarly, so that at the end of the year, you can pull together a beautiful report that says, look, this is how much we made. This is how much we gave back to the community in these different categories. So it doesn't have to be super complex or complicated.
Right. Understood. And that's definitely true. Like the credibility, it comes from consistency, right? As much as you can use the same definitions, same cadence, same evidence trails. So month after month, it becomes a repeatable process. And at the end, everything is clear when you have to provide those kind of reports, as you mentioned, that make sure that balance sheets are accurate and your savings utilization is solid and clear as well. So moving on from there, next up, what we wanted your opinion was, since given your experience, we do understand that you have helped covered entities build their own programs and expand their programs as well. So what's the biggest operational bottleneck that you have seen the programs, that keep programs from scaling early on and in later stages as well? So any operational bottlenecks that you see there, any problems that you solved, or any examples that you can share that would be helpful as well?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that come to mind. EMRs are the first one. Depending on which electronic medical record the covered entity is using, that can actually make a pretty big difference. We work with clients that are very small, all the way up to large health systems. And what we see with the smaller ones, typically they're using inexpensive EMRs that don't necessarily have the integrations and the reporting capability that are required, for data aggregation or compliance. A lot of times we have to run specific reports, that show ICD codes to prove that patients are eligible. So again, EMR is kind of one of the first things that we see that really makes an impact on getting the program up and running quickly and scaling quickly. Aside from that, it can be personnel, honestly. You'd be surprised at sometimes we walk into a very large covered entity and, they have one person working on 340B and that's only half of their job. They're like the inventory coordinator, plus they have 340B coordinator bolted onto their title. And it's just not enough. Typically, that's 340B, it should be a major focus, for covered entities that are participating in it. And it requires sometimes, a team of people.
Right, of course. And just on the side note, have you ever seen any example where you have seen teams build a program or scale it too early, and in those cases it did not end up resulting well later on in the future?
I'm trying to think. Scaling too early, typically looks like adding on a bunch of different contract pharmacy networks, before that's required. There's not a huge risk to that. The biggest risk is you're going to pay minimal fees for these pharmacies, or the wholesalers to maintain the accounts before they're being utilized. As far as other risks, scaling too early, it's just a complexity thing. If you add on all this complexity and compliance before you need to, that the risk on that is just kind of burning out the team and confusing people that are, just getting into the program possibly and not really fully understanding why it's being scaled so quickly. But yeah, that's it. So it creates an administrative and compliance burden, more than like a financial burden.
Right, of course. Yeah, that takes us back to the point that these steps should be taken with right measurements, right? And that was the next question as well. Like before expanding, so any governance rules that you think that must be defined first, any layers that must be cleared out first of all before a covered entity thinks to scale their program?
Definitely. We would typically look at patient eligibility methodology first and see, okay, are you capturing too many patients? Is your risk tolerance, too high before we start expanding? Or could it be the alternative? Is your patient definition too narrow and you're leaving, savings on the table by not including folks? So, I would get that done as one of the first orders of business before expanding, is to make sure your patient eligibility is tweaked to exactly where you want it to be, not too risky, but not too conservative. And then I would start looking at things like capture rate. If you've got a current contract pharmacy network, what does the capture rate look like for that? If it's only 20-30%, then there's a lot of work to be done first before adding on more pharmacies. Although that can be strategic, if you look at the pharmacy report and you see that, a large majority of patients are being sent to a particular pharmacy, then of course add that pharmacy on. But that's more of a targeted approach rather than like a broad addition of a whole pharmacy network. So again, it's just making sure you're bringing your current program, maximizing it as much as you can before adding on, new expansion.
Right. Great. So of course, like when, these methodologies and governance layers are clear, then tools can accelerate as well. Otherwise, as we have seen in the example that you mentioned previously as well, that this could become our future a bottleneck and administrative burden later on as well in the scaling process. So speaking about compliance, right, and what actually works in compliance, is that an audit ready month look like in practice for you? How does that, look like in terms of habits and checkpoints and any of those that matter consistently that you would like our entities to follow?
Definitely, yeah. So, audit readiness and compliance in 340B it should not be reactive. It has to be proactive to be successful. So, in a typical month with our clients that we work with, there's going to be things like monthly claim sampling, and then that depends. Here's a little caveat: your policies and procedures should define what that looks like. If they say that you're going to audit 10% of claims, then make sure you're auditing what your PMP say you're auditing. But there should be some component of monthly claim sampling, some component of looking. That's going to include looking for duplicate discounts with Medicaid claims. It's going to include updating your provider roster to make sure that that's always up to date. If you have providers leave or get added on, those things need to be updated, in real time. And looking at, just contract pharmacy reconciliation and utilization, making sure that your pharmacy network stays up to date as well. Making sure that, a lot of times pharmacies will change addresses and it will be a small change, a suite number gets added on or removed. And those are things that tend to go unnoticed, but upon HRSA audit, they will find that and it can turn into a finding or at least a recommendation. So just keeping up with those details on a monthly basis is very important.
Right. That's of course right. And I think we can all agree that audit readiness is not a binder, it's a rhythm, it's a monthly cadence that you have to run to make sure that your program is explainable. So what are like the top 3 items you expect to see in a clean documentation trail? As you mentioned, some of those need to be kept out consistently and kept maintained consistently as well. So any top 3 that you would like to mention?
Think if I had to pick 3 things for a documentation trail, it would be, again, going back to patient definition, making sure that everyone is aware of what patients in your organization are considered eligible for 340B. Number 2 would be looking at your Medicaid decision. Are you going to carve in? Are you going to carve out? And then sticking to that. And kind of for, part 2A would be, in each state, they have different rules about Medicaid managed care. Some states allow you to carve that in, and some states, require that be carved out, just like Medicaid fee for service. So there's a state by state decision making, around that. And number 3 would just be making sure that you have your evidence of internal monitoring that your program is doing, and that can look at monthly audit logs, quarterly 340B meeting minutes, things like that do come up in audits.
Right. So yeah, we can confidently say that those artifacts are basically like the program's memory. Like without them, every question can become an investigation of its own. So where do you see teams unintentionally create diversion or duplicate discount risks, and how do you help them prevent this operationally?
I think the biggest risk of diversion comes around referrals. Having a referral capture process is very important. We haven't talked about that yet today. And covered entities do this in a lot of different ways. The standard always has been a closed loop referral, which means, you can document the referral out, to a specialist. And then ideally you receive a progress note back from that specialist, which closes the loop. That's probably the most secure way to capture a referral. We certainly, have seen a little bit less stringent standards in certain covered entities where, as long, because honestly, the HRSA, the 340B statute doesn't require that progress note back. It doesn't state that in the statute. It just states that you have to be able to show ownership of the patient. So, covered entities can stretch that a little bit. But I think that's the biggest risk. Whatever you do, again, you just have to make sure that you're doing it consistently, and whatever your process is has to be defined in your policies and procedures and stick to it. So yeah, that's probably the biggest diversion risk that we see. Other than that, it's around those Medicaid managed cares, particularly. like I mentioned, paying attention to what your state dictates around Medicaid managed care claims is very important. Those are probably the
Right.
top two things that come to mind.
Of course, of course. And the examples that you mentioned like takes me back to one of the phrases we heard before as well. Like the scary risks are usually the quiet ones in the 340B domain. And it's usually the drift that no one sees until dispute or audit forces the visibility to be required. So, last thing that I would like to ask about, like particularly in the compliance section, that if you can change one thing about day-to-day compliance and things that you usually see, but you would want covered entities to avoid, more importantly, so what would that be in particular?
It has to be proactive, not reactive. So when teams are thinking about compliance, day-to-day compliance, again, it's going to revolve around spot checking claims, at least once a month, pull probably at least 10% of claims, and check those out. And from start to finish, that means, not just patient eligibility, but look at the pharmacy, look at the provider, look at the payer, make sure all those things are eligible. And then trace that claim down to the order, and make sure that the inventory and the accumulations are matched up as they should be, especially for covered entities that are using multiple pharmacy networks, multiple wholesalers. Those things can get super complex, and if you don't do it for a few months and then you try to go catch back up to it, it's going to be a nightmare. So just try to keep it in the forefront. Do a little bit every day. That way, it doesn't just build up and start getting overwhelming. We've seen that happen, and it's scary when that happens. And paying attention to your purchases is something that gets overlooked more than you would expect. Covered entities that are not paying attention to their drug purchase pricing can get blindsided. If some kind of 340B ESP reporting goes wrong and you're not paying attention, and all of a sudden you lose 340B pricing for a specific manufacturer, if you're not paying attention, months go by, and then somebody finally says, our drug expense seems to be more than it should be. And come to find out, you've been paying, regular retail price for drugs for a few months. It's a total nightmare to try to go back to the manufacturer at that time and get your money back. So just again, being proactive with all of these things is the most important thing you can do in compliance.
Right. Yeah, of course. Like the way you have mentioned compliance, it's feel quite like a normal operations instead of special event work, right? And everything can just improve through these simple steps that you mentioned. Cost can be saved, risk can be removed, and speed of rebates and discount program can be taken further as well. And then there's more opportunities for extensions. So yeah, thanks a lot for answering those questions, and I do really value your input. Yes, Atif, yeah, over to you.
Yeah, so thank you, Robert. So yeah, I agree with you. Being proactive in all these areas, whether it is traceability or paying attention to the purchases or keeping an eye on day-to-day basis instead of waiting for an event, is a great way to stay ahead of the game. So Robert, it has been great to talk about all these topics, starting from rebate to transparency to savings, optimization, expansion to compliance. It has been a great conversation. So Robert, before we wrap up, so what advice would you give if you were advising a covered entity leadership team today? Like, what are top 3 things they should prioritize in the next 12 months? And what mistakes should they absolutely avoid? Like, if someone is just stepping into 340B leadership role, what's the mindset shift they need immediately?
Sure, there are definitely some low hanging fruit items that are essential to the program, that I would make sure that this leadership was aware of. Again, you would be surprised at things that we see sometimes. Things like doing your annual recertification. That is such an easy process that happens once a year for covered entities, where they have to log in, to HRSA OPACE and click maybe 3 buttons to recertify your program. Every single year, there are entities that fail to do that, and they are locked out of the program, for at least a quarter when that happens. That should never ever happen. So just keeping those types of things in the back of mind is sometimes life or death to these programs. So, again, making sure your recertification is up to date, making sure you maintain your eligibility. Depending on what kind of covered entity you are, there are different eligibility requirements. For a lot of the grantees, especially in the STD world, there are increasing eligibility requirements. A lot of these MOUs with county health departments are requiring data now, where that didn't used to be the case in the past. You just got your MOU for 3 years and you were good to go. Now they are typically shifting to 1-year MOUs, and they want to see monthly reporting on how many HIV tests are being done in the community and things like that. So do whatever you need to do to maintain your eligibility. Because again, if you lose your eligibility, then your program is dead in the water, and it's going to be hugely impactful. It's going to be a giant loss to the entity.
So, like annual recertification, maintaining eligibility, these are two critical items that they should keep in mind. So,
yeah, and then optimization is the other thing that I think about. Once you get past eligibility and compliance, those are the mandatory things that have to happen. Optimization, it's not mandatory. You're going to be in the program whether you're optimized or not. But if you want to make the most impact, then your program has to be optimized. And when we think about optimization, we think about having a pie, and you grow the pie is one way to increase optimization, and that means get more patients in the door. Through things like marketing and website SEO. And then the other way is to capture a bigger slice of the pie. And you do that through monitoring things like capture rate, patient adherence, making sure that you're getting the most out of your patients that are already using your facilities.
Got it. Yeah, I totally agree on that. So, Robert, for those who listening who may want to connect with you or learn more about Ravin Consultants, what's the best way to reach to you?
Sure. My email is robert@ravinconsultants.com. Also, check out our website, ravinconsultants.com. There's tons of information on there. You can schedule a meet and greet through there. So yeah, either one of those two things would be fine.
Robert, thank you for joining us. This was thoughtful and grounded, exactly the type of conversation 340B Pulse is meant to bring forward. This has been 340B Pulse, powered by NorthArc and Purologics. We shall see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you both.